Good morning. So this is it. This is the reassembly video. Hoping it'll just be one video, but we got a lot of little details to figure out, so it'll be one long video or maybe a two-parter. But I thought great first step was getting the wheels on, the fender on, making it a roller, and a stopper. I did go ahead and throw the brake cables on off camera. Those are pretty straightforward. And I got new ones. Those are from Dr. ATV. So cables are on, and I just threw the pads on there. So let's start with the front wheel here, front fender, and then we'll move to the rear. Alright, so just talking order of operations here, the front wheel has a spacer on the axle, so I'm going to throw that down in this oil seal. Then I'm going to put the brake pads in, and then we're going to kind of just lift the whole thing up, and then push the axle through. Front wheel is definitely a little easier, I think, than the rear. There's less to hold in place. There's that spacer. So remember, the brake stay is on the left fork, and this little part of the brake pad kind of hugs the brake stay. I like to put a little bit of grease on the axle, just so it comes out easy next time. I'm just gonna go with one of these hairpin style cotter pins so I can take it out and put it back in a little easier. Alright, so like you saw, I just put on the front wheel, so then I went to lift up the front end and give it a spin, and it won't budge. Well, I looked around for a minute and found our culprit here. This arm of the fender is catching the nubs on the tire. So what I want to do is just put my screwdriver in there and see if we can bend it out a little bit. Alright, you know what? Let's just pop the tire off, get the fender off, and bend it back into shape. Alright, so there you go. The front wheel freely spins now. Got it back bolted up. Put the cotter pin back in there. So now let's move on to the rear wheel, and for that we're going to throw on the sprocket first on this side, then we'll get the wheel in there and the brake pads. Alright, so I got the rear wheel mounted here, but something is off with the axle spacers. So if you remember, when I took the rear axle apart, this was the spacer on it. Just 4 washers and a nut. The thickness of those comes out to just over 1 inch. Well, I wanted to replace this, so I went on eBay and just bought a CT90 rear axle spacer. But you can see this spacer actually, I hadn't even thought to check, but it's quite a bit longer. You know, almost, I would say almost like maybe 3/16. So the result of that is that right now we have no exposed threads on the axle, which means we can't get our cotter pin in. So something is definitely off. Also, this little cover on the rear sprocket is loose, and I feel like that definitely should not be like that. So I'm going to take this apart again, and we're going to look at everything, and I don't know, maybe we'll shave down that spacer. We'll look into it. Alright, so now let's get the carb in. I couldn't find an OEM clamp on the air filter here, so I'm just using a hose clamp. And on this side, obviously you have that paper gasket between the intake and the engine. So I'll just line that all up, and we'll see if we can get this old rubber to cooperate. Yeah, let's go ahead and grab the hairdryer. Alright, so I don't know if you saw in the last clip, but when I threw these short bolts from the intake manifold into the carb here, they just weren't really biting enough, and I thought I was tightening them, and then it just pulled some threads out. Now I've been trying with a tap to get in there and chase these threads, and I just can't seem to do it. Like it's just cutting new threads pretty much. So went ahead and I bought M7 bolts and an M7 tap. We're just going to drill these out and tap them a little bigger. I think that's probably the best way to go about this. It'll still be metric, just I think maybe an 11 or 12 mil instead of a 10 mil bolt. Alright, well, didn't really think ahead there. Of course, if I'm going to fit the M7 bolts in here, I'm going to have to drill these out. Now, it's one thing to drill out and retap already stripped holes in a carb body, especially when I have a spare carb body. It's another thing to drill out the intake manifold. I feel like I'd rather just leave it as is, so for now, what I'm going to do is just run some M6 bolts through there and just put a nut on the end and tighten them down like that to sort of clamp it. Should be just fine, as long as that rubber kind of seals. We won't have any air leak or anything, so go ahead and do that. Alright, so there's the carb secured in there. Feels really good. Hopefully there's no air leaks. We'll find out when we get the thing running. So now I'm going to throw the cap on and try to get the cable routed up here, which means first I got to take out the old cable. I actually got a new one of these rubber grommets too. So I take this all apart, and when I actually pull it out, I'm going to tie a string to it so I can thread back in the new throttle cable, because it has to go through the handlebars and it just makes my life a little easier. So I think you want to pull them out the end of the handlebar here like this, and then just at the end of the cable here, just gonna throw some solder on that. So I have the throttle cable grommet on there, and now I'm just gonna pull it through using the solder. There we are. Yeah, having that thread or solder or whatever you're using makes that much easier. Alright, so I cleaned off most of the old grease, so now I'm going to put some new grease on there. Mostly just where this little piece slides. So if you don't know how this works, there's one big sort of thread inside the grip here, and there's this groove obviously in the end of the throttle cable, and when you twist the grip, it pulls this whole thing up or down, because the whole thing rides on this groove in the handlebars. It already had grease on there, but it was kind of black and dirty, so just gonna use this stuff. Alright, so now this throttle cable goes in there, and this then can sit down in there. Oops. Now, it'll go a few ways, but one of the ways it'll actually work, so you just kind of want to figure out what that orientation is. Alright, that should be it. Now I'm gonna clean this up, get it back together, and we can see if it's actually working. Well, something's wrong. Throttle's sticking. So, I don't know. Let me look at that. Alright, well this is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, I suppose. Basically I threw on all this rear end stuff, luggage rack, shocks, everything like that, and realized 2 things. The first is that I never actually went ahead and finished the paint on the turn signal brackets. So that paint doesn't do a clear coat or anything, you bake it, or in the case of the exhaust pipe, I'm going to run the bike and get it hot, and it sort of cures when it gets hot, but until you do that, it just sort of chips off. So I pulled those off and did another coat of paint on them, and they're in the oven now. And then for the rest of everything back here, you know, I had it soaking in evaporust, and basically I didn't do anything to prevent further rust because I didn't think it was necessary. I washed it with water, and well, it was necessary. And all that stuff kind of rusted again pretty quick after we had a rain. So I have all that stuff back off now, and what I'm gonna do is I got some fluid film and some surface shield. They're kind of like lanolin based water, you know, rust inhibitors. So I'm gonna clean off the rust from all those parts now, using evaporust and then also just some elbow grease, and we'll get the rear end back together, this time with rust inhibitor on it, and then we can keep going with reassembly. Alright, so I'll show you this on the luggage rack, but for the chrome what I'm doing is I had some evaporust on it and then quadruple O steel wooled the rust off, and then I took some salt water and some aluminum foil and rubbed the whole thing down with that, and the idea is that there's some chemical reaction between the aluminum with the salt water and the chrome, and it kind of helps dissolve some of the rust and then help prevent it. And then the other thing I'm going to do is use some of this stuff. So this is surface shield. It's like a lanolin, it's like a greasy spray kind of. And then I also have fluid film, which is a similar spray. I watched a video where he reviewed surface shield versus fluid film. Seems like fluid film wipes off easier, whereas surface shield becomes kind of like a harder surface. So I'm basically gonna use surface shield for spots like, you know, under the fender and on the back side of this, even on the front of this, places that I'm probably never really gonna touch again. And then fluid film for spots like up here, these bolts, or the carb bolts that I might, you know, touch again, so I don't need them to get all crusted up, but I still want that protection. So anyway, surface shield on both sides of this, and then we'll bolt these on. Also threw anti-seize on the bolts down here. Alright, so a couple days ago I just tacked together this little kind of like bin out of some scrap wood I had. And it's just to hold these garbage bags, which I then poured the evaporust in. And down in here we have the luggage rack primarily. So you can see I didn't quite get it fully submerged on all the sides. The bottom still needs some work. I think I'm just going to go at it with some steel wool and maybe a wire wheel and try to get it as clean as I can. And then, yeah, we'll surface shield the bottom. We'll do that aluminum rub on the top, and then probably do some fluid film or something on the top. Or maybe just some engine oil to kind of fill in all the little gaps in the chrome. And we can get it back on the bike. Alright, so we are back where we were a couple weeks ago when this started rusting, and now hopefully we've prevented that rust. So I got something in the mail that I think is going to fix my rear axle spacing problem. So if you remember on the rear sprocket hub here, it had, when I put it together, I had this piece, this little collar, and then this piece, this larger kind of washer. As it turns out, I looked at the parts diagram, and that's supposed to be one piece. So I went on eBay and I bought. So we're going to throw that in here instead, and then hopefully the spacing should be good on the rear axle. If not, we might have to shave down the spacer I bought, a little bit, but let's see how it works. Alright, so there's the rear axle spacing. You can see there's just not quite enough axle exposed at the end there for me to stick a cotter pin through it. So what I am going to do is take off that rear spacer again, just shave off maybe 1/8 inch, 3/16 on the belt sander. Then we'll get it back together and the spacing should be pretty good. Then we can get a cotter pin in there, get the chain on and a chain guard. Alright, so I shaved down that spacer a little bit. Got just enough of the axle showing that I can get a cotter pin through. Then I went ahead and hooked up the brake stay and the brake linkage. So now I want to go ahead and do the tank. I got the fuel line hooked up at the bottom here. Looking from the top of the bike, the left side is the on and the right side is reserve. R, reserve, right, there you go. So I'm going to throw this on, bolt it together, and then we'll run that fuel line down into the carb. Alright, so there are probably multiple ways of doing this, but I'm going to route the fuel line through the bottom and up into the tank this way, as opposed to having it already on the tank and routing it down through. Alright, so here's a problem that's kind of been on the back burner in my head for a while. The foot peg here, the left foot peg, is bent. The peg itself is a little bit bent, and then also it looks like the actual mount is bent. Basically it sticks up too high. Clearly it was just dropped on the left side, and that bent the bar up a little bit. So, did some reading online. It looks like I shouldn't need to heat it up to bend it back. I should just need to use a big pipe for some leverage, clamp it in the vise, and see if I can bend it back straight. So I'm going to try that, and we'll see how that goes. Alright, so that definitely took more than I thought it would, but I think I got them pretty straight. Basically, it was a 1¼ inch, 6 foot galvanized steel pipe on this peg here, and then I was standing out here. The foot pegs are screwed in with 3½ inch cabinet screws into the 2x6s. So standing over here, leverage over here, got them decently straight. You know, they'll probably get bent again, so not much point in being too perfect about it. I'm gonna get them back on the bike now. Alright, so with the foot pegs straightened out, I'm gonna now get the rubbers on there. These are new foot peg rubbers. So just gonna take, I have this like mixture of extra WD-40 and PB Blaster that I add when the aerosol runs out. Just gonna put that all on the foot peg here, all inside. Alright, pretty good. Alright, so I got most of the old exhaust gasket material out of there. Just scraping it away with a screwdriver and a steel brush. Put some anti-seize on the new gasket because I don't want it to get stuck up in there like the old one did. I'm doing the flat side towards the engine and the sort of more bent side out. And I think that sort of matches the contours of the engine and the pipe. So, also going to put some anti-seize on these studs here. These are new studs, but don't want them to rust because it was kind of hard to get them out originally. And now I can just bring the pipe up to this and tighten it down. Alright, now we're going to run our chain across our new sprockets, and it'll be probably kind of awkward getting around everything. Basically going to wrap it around the front sprocket and then try to pull both ends and throw the master link down here. Pretty sure this one's already cut to length. It came with the sprockets off eBay, so shouldn't have to worry about cutting it, just linking it together. Alright, now that we got the new chain on, let's go ahead and guard it. Alright, so now let's set the chain tension. Should be between 1 and 2 centimeters. Alright, so my throttle is sticking, and I think in part that's because of the grease I used up here, so I'm going to go ahead and wipe most of that away. Maybe replace it with just like a light oil. And then I also think it's because something's catching with the slide in here. It was catching when I got the carb, and the spring just isn't quite enough to overpower that catch. So I'm going to take some sandpaper or something and try to open that up a little bit so the slide can freely go up and down. But I'll start up here at the bar with the grease. Alright, so I cleaned up the handlebar and I lubed the throttle cable, and it's definitely a little bit less sticky. It has a little more willingness to return. But I actually looked into it, and it turns out that these bikes never really had a snappy throttle from the factory. At least that's what a bunch of people online are saying. So, and then I just have to set the ignition timing, because we never did that when we rebuilt the engine. And I should be good to put some gas in this thing and see if we can get it running. Alright, so I think the last thing I have to do before getting this engine running is to set the ignition timing. So I'm just going to take off the points cover here. Alright, so first I'm just going to put a little bit of assembly lube on the felt here. That's supposed to keep the cam lubricated. Alright, now the thing with this is you want the cam lubed, but you don't want to get oil obviously on the actual breaker points, because then they won't make contact. So, alright, so now I'm gonna take the stator cover off as well over here. Alright, so I just got the stator cover off and the points cover off. Now, when we put this engine together, we literally just threw the points plate back in there. I didn't do anything to set timing or even set it to like a default rough estimation of where timing would be. It's literally just in there and bolted in place. So the first thing I'm gonna do here is I've loosened the two plate bolts, and I'm just gonna get this like roughly centered. You have this little bump here in the engine and this groove in your points plate, and you use this basically to adjust the timing of the ignition. So I'm just gonna set this roughly in the middle, and we're gonna go ahead and tighten these two bolts. Now we're gonna check the points gap, and the way we're gonna do this is we're gonna rotate the engine until the gap is at its absolute largest. Okay, around there. At this point, we want the points gap to be between 0.012 and 0.016 inches. So I've got a 0.013 right in that area. We can see, okay, it's a little tight, so I'm gonna loosen it just a hair. So I'm gonna loosen this screw and this screw down here. All right, now I'm gonna rotate the engine to get the pressure off of the points. All right, and now to make the gap a little wider, you can see got my screwdriver in here, and I'm gonna turn it to the right as if I'm tightening. You can see that's just gonna bring that up just a little bit, doesn't have to be much. All right, so with one screwdriver, I'm just holding the points plate a little bit more open, and with the other, I'm gonna tighten down the bolts. All right, now we can go back, rotate the engine a little further. We can see how we did. I'm gonna open that gap up and measure it. You know, it's pretty good. Might be a little tight, but also my feeler gauge is a little bit than it has to be. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is rotate the engine until after the compression stroke at F. So that stands for fire. So rotating, at some point I'm gonna feel compression. All right, here it comes. And all right, the engine's at F. So at this point, the points gap should be just barely cracking open. You can see here that it's actually a pretty big gap. So the next thing I'm gonna do is loosen, again, the points plate bolts. And we'll get our screwdriver back in there. We're gonna hold this rotor at F with one wrench. And then with this wrench, we're gonna adjust this, this way actually, so that points gap is just barely open. Alright, let's tighten that down and see what that looks like. Alright, you can see I'm still a little early there, so I'm gonna loosen this again and keep trying. Alright, that looks like I'm pretty close, so now I'm gonna throw a battery in there and get my voltmeter, and we'll see if we can get a more accurate means of testing the points. Alright, so like I said in a previous video, I don't have a 6-volt test light, so instead I'm just using my multimeter. I've got one side hooked up to the bottom of the 2 points, and the other side hooked up to ground. And what we're going to do is just rotate the engine until we get to that F mark, and we should, right at that F mark, see the number jump up to 6. But I have a feeling could be a little early. Just going slow until I hit it. Alright, we're at the F mark there. Oh, you know what? Wrong stroke. Let's go around. This should really be... Oh, you know what? The bike is off. Okay, there we go. What I'm looking for is right coming up on the F mark here. I'm just going slow. We're going to wait for the point where the voltage jumps up. Then we're going to stop rotating the engine. Ah, just there. See, just there. So we're actually pretty close. We're just a hair early. So I'm gonna make another adjustment. Obviously turn the bike off so I don't get shocked. Make another adjustment here. Alright, now we're gonna turn the bike back on. Back off the engine. Let's see if we bring it back forward. Oh man, that is dead on. That's great. And you can actually, funnily enough, you can actually hear, and I don't know if maybe you can even see a little spark there right at the point. You can definitely hear a little tiny spark just between the breaker points. So cool, I'm super happy with that. That's right on the mark. I know you guys probably didn't have the best view, but just gonna have to take my word for it. So let's get the points plate back on, and let's get the stator cover back on, throw some oil in this thing and some gas, and see if we can get it running. Alright, so I'm using the same oil that I use in the CL450 motorcycle 4-stroke 10W40. It's got like extra zinc and stuff for wet clutches and all that, so. Alright, so we got ignition timing good, tappet clearance good, engine has oil. Obviously we have spark, we have compression, all that stuff, so I think we're good to see if we can get this thing running. We got a fully charged battery too. So yeah, I'm just gonna fill it up with some gas. Let's hope we don't have a leak down at the carb, and see if we can get this thing started. Carb's already leaking. Well, I found my problem. This screw is totally stripped. Guess I didn't notice that on the carb rebuild. Alright, so it's been a couple days. I got some hardware now, some longer M3 hardware. But it has been raining, so I'm just gonna hit this with some WD-40 to try to get some of the water out. And yeah, then we're just gonna throw a longer M3 screw in there. Alright, not leaking yet. Alright, looks like it's not leaking. So, I think we're good to try to see if we can fire this thing up. Alright, once again we have gas, oil, valve set, ignition timing set, we got battery, we got spark, we got compression. Let's see if we can fire this thing up. Alright, let's maybe take the choke off a little bit. Certainly making a lot of noise, isn't it? Now we got a neutral light. Alright, just taking a look at it now, I think I actually never set the valves. So I'm going to set the tappet clearance now. You saw how that happens in the Will It Run video, so just going to do it again here. Alright, yeah, it's amazing that thing ran. There was like a 1/4 inch of valve clearance on the exhaust valve. I guess I just never set it. I thought I'd do it when I got the bike together. And then when I got the bike together, I thought I did it back when I rebuilt the engine. Anyway, we're back to a loose 2/1000 on the valves. Let's see if we can get it running a little better now. Okay, flex the choke. Alright, I'm thinking there might be an air leak in this old air boot, so got some starting fluid, and basically I'm going to get the bike running and then sort of spray the air boot and see if we get a surge or what, because basically it only wants to run on choke. Okay, well, that actually is fine. Huh, that doesn't sound good at all. Huh. I don't know what that is. Alright, so spraying all these connections with starting fluid doesn't change the RPM at all. So I don't think we have an air leak. I think maybe we just have some dirty jets in the carb. So I'm gonna pop off the bowl, and then we're gonna take the carb off and go downstairs and clean it a little bit better and see if that makes any difference. Yeah, sure enough, my idle jet looks super clogged, so I'm gonna get some guitar string and try to clean that out. Alright, yeah, I actually just couldn't see light through this jet at all. Now I can. It's pretty clear. So I'm gonna put it back in the carb and let's go try it out. That would explain why it couldn't run off the choke or without some throttle. So I hope that's all it was. There's only one way to find out. Alright, let's try this again with a freshly cleaned carb. Alright, so I'm actually going to leave the video here. We got the bike to run, we have ignition timing and the valve clearance, and everything internally on the engine seems good. I'm pretty sure that we're just having a carb issue. So one of you guys very helpfully mentioned in the comments of my carb rebuild video that it's probably a CT90 carb that I'm using because it didn't have the altitude compensator. And actually I went through on the manual and it turns out that the jetting on the carb that I just ran the bike with, the jetting on that carb is too small for a CT90. So I'm pretty sure that's what it is. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is probably gonna order a carb off Amazon because some people have success with those and I figured it's cheap and it'll get here overnight. And then I'll also go on eBay and I'll probably order a real OEM CT90 carb. It'll be a little more expensive, but you know, kind of seems like the right thing to do. So anyway, with that, I'm going to leave this video here. We made some really great progress. We did hear it fire up, and hopefully in the next video, we're going to get it to run perfect. Thanks for watching.